You- Transfer of learning is the process of applying or acquiring knowledge or over of knowledge, skills, habits, attitudes, emotions, or other responses from one learning situation to another. For example, riding a scooter becomes easier and quicker if we know how to ride a bicycle. Now, when a learned skill is used in another, it is called transfer of learning. For example, learning hockey and skills used in cricket. Now, therefore, the transfer of learning is the process of applying acquired knowledge to new situations. There are different types of learning or training, and one of them is positive transfer. The transfer is said to be positive when something previously learned benefits the performance or learning in a new situation. For example, the knowledge of the typewriter helps a learner learning computer to learn how to type using a computer because the knowledge in the previous learning benefits the performance in of learning in the new situation or performance or learning in a new situation because the typewriter has similar keys to the keyboard of the computer, so you can use the knowledge of the skills you obtained from writing a typewriter into this new learning situation. Now, this can also be grouped as a near transfer, the application of skills that are very similar to the original learning, and far transfer, which is application of skills that are different from the original learning context. Now, negative transfer. In case previous learning hinders, blocks, or interferes with the performance of the new learning situation, we call it negative transfer. For example, the pronunciation of mother tongue becomes an obstacle while learning pronouncing the new English words. For example, if you're learning French and it somehow hinders you or makes it difficult for you to pronounce certain words in English, then that is negative transfer. Zero transfer. Now, zero transfer occurs when the learning of one activity neither facilitates nor interferes with the learning of new work. It is said to be zero transfer. So, if there is a learning of one activity does not interfere with the learning of new activity, then that is zero transfer. For example, when you're learning to play football, it may not have impact on English speaking. Therefore, there's zero transfer there. Vertical transfer involves using the prior knowledge to learn more complex knowledge in the in the same subject area. For example, learning the basic arithmetic in mathematics is crucial for understanding algebra. Horizontal transfer. This is when the knowledge learned in one context or subject facilitates the learning in a different context or subject, but may be related in related subject. For example, knowledge of mathematics can be applied to physics or in daily life situations, so that is horizontal transfer. They are different contexts or subjects, but the knowledge acquired in one can be applied in another. This is different from vertical transfer, which involves using of prior knowledge to learn more complex knowledge in the same subject area. Principles of learning. Educational psychologists have identified several principles of learning that seem generally applicable to the learning process. These principles have been discovered, tested, and used in practical situations. They provide additional insight to what makes people learn most effectively. The first principle of learning is readiness. Now, readiness, the principle of learning, implies to the degree of concentration and eagerness. It's the degree of how concentrated someone is and how eager they are to learn something new. Individuals learn best when they are physically, mentally, and emotionally ready to learn. And they do not learn well if there is no reason for learning. So there should be that urge, there should be a degree of concentration and eagerness, the urge makes them to learn. Getting students ready to learn, creating interest by showing the value of the subject matter, and providing continuous mental and physical challenges is usually the instructor's responsibility. And if students have a strong purpose, a clear objective, and a definite reason for learning something, they make more progress than if they lack motivation. And in other words, when students are ready to learn, they meet the instructor at least halfway, simplifying the instructor's job. Because they're willing to learn, they'll even read ahead or something. By the time you come to explain to these people the new concept, they already know something. Now, since learning is an active process, students might have adequate rest and physical ability. Now, the basic needs of students should be satisfied before they are ready for or capable of learning. Students who are exhausted or in an illness cannot learn much. If they are distracted by outside responsibilities, interests, or worries, or have overcrowded the schedule, or other unresolved issues, students may have little interest in learning. Exercise. Another principle of learning. The principle of exercise says that those things which are most repeated are best remembered. It is the basis of the drill and practice. It has been often proven the students learn best and retain information longer when they have meaningful practice and repetition. The key here is that practice must be meaningful, and practice leads to improvement only when it is followed by a feedback. Human memory is fallible. The mind cannot retain, evaluate, and apply new concepts or practices after a single exposure. Students do not learn complex tasks in a single session. They learn by applying what they have learned and been taught or shown to them, and every time the practice, learning continues. The time practice occurs, learning continues. Now, these include the students recall, review, summarize, and the manual drill and the physical applications. Now, all of these serve to create learning abilities. The instructor must repeat important terms of the subject matter at reasonable intervals and provide opportunities for students to practice, while making sure that this process is directed towards a goal. Effect. The principle of effect is based on the emotional reaction of students, and it has a direct relationship to the motivation. The principle of effect is that learning is strengthened when accompanied by a pleasant or satisfying feeling. So if you accompany learning by a pleasant or satisfying feeling, then learning will occur. And the learning is weakened when associated with an unpleasant feeling. Positive reinforcement. This is more apt to lead to success and motivate a learner. So the instructor should recognize and commend improvement. Whatever learning situation, it should contain elements that affect the students positively and give them a feeling of satisfaction. Therefore, instructors should be conscious about using punishment in the classroom. Because if learners associate it with learning, with the content, then they'll be demotivated to learn. Now, one of the most important obligations of the instructor is to set up a learning situation in a manner that each trainee will be able to see the evidence of progress, achievement to a certain degree of success. Experiences that produce feelings of defeat, frustration, anger, confusion, futility are unpleasant for students, and if, for example, an instructor exempts to teach advanced concepts to all the initial engagement, the student is likely to feel inferior and be frustrated. Impressing students about the difficulty of the task can be learned and make a teaching task difficult. Usually, it is better to tell students that a problem or task, although difficult, than their capability to understand or perform. Every learning experience does not have to be entirely successful, nor does a student have to master each lesson completely. However, every learning experience should contain elements that leave the students with some degree of good feelings. They feel good about it. Positivity usually is the solution to certain problems. A student's chance of success is increased as if the learning experience is a pleasant one. Primacy. Primacy is a state of being first. Primacy. So, it creates a strong and most unshakable impressions. This is why teachers need to make very good introductions, you know what I'm saying? So, things learned fast create a strong impression in the mind that is difficult to erase. For the instructor, this means that what is taught must be right at the first time. For the students, it means that learning must be right. And teaching wrong facts is harder than teaching them something right for the first time. If, for example, a student learns a faulty technique, an instructor will have to face a difficult task of correcting the bad habits and reteaching the correct ones. Now, the student's first experience should be positive and functional, lay a foundation for all that is to follow. And when students learns to be procedurally correct and applied the very first time, the instructor must present the subject matter in a logical order, step by step, making sure that the students have already learned the preceding step. Now, if the task is learned in isolation and is not initially applied to the overall performance, and if it must be relearned, the process can be confusing and time-consuming. Preparing and following a lesson plan facilitates the correct delivery of the subject matter correctly the first time. Recency. The principle of recency states that all things most recently learned are best remembered. Things most recently learned are best remembered. Conversely, the farther a student is removed time-wise from a new fact or understanding, the more difficult it is to remember. For example, it is fairly easy to recall the telephone number dialed a few minutes ago, but it is usually impossible to recall a new number dialed last week. The closer a training or learning time is to the time of actual need to apply the training, the more apt the learner will be able to perform successfully. Information acquired last generally remembered best. Frequent reviews and summarization helps fix the mind and material covered. The instructors recognize the principle of recency and they carefully plan the summary of the lesson situation. An instructor repeats the reinstates and reemphasizes the important points at the end of the lesson to help the students remember. The principle of recency often determines the sequence of the lectures within the course of instruction. Intensity. The more intense the material taught, the more likely it is to be retained. A sharp, clear, and vivid, dramatic, exciting learning experience teaches more than a routine, boring experience. Intensity. Freedom. The principle of freedom states that all things learned are best. All things freely learned are best remembered or are best learned. So if further students is coerced, the more difficult it is for him to learn, assimilate, and implement what he has been learned. You can't students make it difficult. They're not free. They should be free to do whatever they want to do. Requirement. The law of requirements says that we must have something to obtain or do something. This could be the ability, skill, instrument, or anything that may help us to learn or gain something new. A starting point is route is needed. For example, if you want to draw a person, you need to have materials with which you draw, and you must know how to draw a point, a line, a figure, and so on until now you can reach your goal, which is to draw a person. All right, see you in the next.